episode 148 of the 4Ps, and each year this week is circled on my calendar. Well, maybe more of a metaphorical circling on the mental calendar, because who circles things on calendars anymore? But the first week of the NCAA basketball tournament is an event that I begin thinking about and longing for, like right after New Year's Day. It also usually coincides with the week of St. Patrick's Day. And that St. Patrick's Day NCAA tournament mashup just serves up incredible memories of watching games, marathons of games with friends in Irish bars in New York City, as well as traveling the country with many of those same friends to be at live tournament games in various cities across America. I think my top 10 favorite St. Patrick's Day city memories are obviously New York, Boston, Chicago, Savannah, Pittsburgh and New Orleans, Seattle, Philly, Kansas City. Wait, I think that's only 9. Those are the only places I've been. So top 9!
The 4 Ps. Professional. Political. Practical. Personal.
This is also the busiest week of my year promoting the March Madness pool, answering individual questions, managing customer service needs, reminding people to complete their brackets, and collecting participation fees from like 500 different entries. It's really a full-time job, but I live for it. It's here. Something practical. I was talking recently with a colleague of mine in Germany about my difficulty turning off my brain at night, as well as how I usually end up eating 2, sometimes 3 meals right here in front of my computer while working each day. So he suggested I read the book Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat by Bruce Daisley. And for the better part of the last year, those 4 words, eat, sleep, work, repeat, capture the cycle that has many of us feeling occasionally trapped. While work can no doubt provide us with meaning, it can also be stressful and at times draining, and can result in a cycle of unhappiness and happiness that isn't always healthy. I've worked at companies that span the spectrum, from incredibly supportive, innovative, positive environments to a bit more drab or even politicized. Yet the majority of workplace studies since the start of the Industrial Revolution all the way up to today show that professional unhappiness is a widespread problem that deeply affects our health, our well-being, our productivity. The majority of people report negative sentiments about their work. 83% of American employees actually say their jobs make them feel more stressed out. Workplace unhappiness is a widespread problem that we can address. Many managers and leaders are aware of this and have positive intentions to change the cultures, but one area of corporate culture that we tend not to think about or talk too much about is the sources of individual stress. Now, in addition to interfering with our creativity, stress can also undermine our ability to make accurate assessments of our own achievements. It kind of holds us back. Now, to be creative, we need to be willing to explore new ideas and take risks. Now, when we're under pressure, the stress boosts our adrenaline, which can give our brains a little kickstart, but it also activates our brain's fear systems. And this in turn deactivates the parts of the brain involved in exploration and risk-taking. Now, pressure encourages people to play it safe, to adhere to old ways of doing things rather than trying out new ones. There are positive aspects of stress, which is that it can show people that we profoundly care about the outcomes of what it is that we're doing, but far too many people lack engagement with their jobs, which can really be bad for business. They don't feel enthusiastic about or connected with the jobs that they're doing or the people they work with. Majority of workers do the bare minimum of what they need to do to receive their paychecks and keep their jobs. But the more employees feel engaged with their jobs and by their jobs, the more motivated they'll be to put in higher levels of effort. Which gets us back to Daisley's book. Some key takeaways for me. 1, that companies need to focus on EX, which is the employee experience. Companies that actively prioritize employee engagement on a per employee basis actually see profits that could be 4 times higher than the average company. Now, the past year has changed the way we work, both positive and negative. But the changes to our schedules, along with other distractions at home, right? Kids, laundry, the Amazon delivery guy, the dog barking in the background, it makes it harder to take real breaks. And we feel this relentless pressure to keep busy. If it's not one of the hundreds of emails we send and receive each day, it's going to be one of the myriad texts or chat messages or Slack notifications or video meetings that demand our attention. Before the pandemic, we exceeded 70 hours of connectivity on digital devices per week. Now, who even knows what that number is? We all know that there are ways to change us, but doing it is actually harder than it sounds. Turning off email notifications on our phones and computers? Sure. But the stress of not knowing when emails might come in could actually create more stress for people. Blocking off time for lunch breaks, it's a great idea, until you end up getting double booked and realize that's the only time that you have in common with someone else. Go for a walk during a phone meeting. A lot of people have suggested that. It's great, right? It sounds great, but I like to have access to or be able to take notes or reference documents during meetings, so I need to be tethered to a device. Ultimately, these tips and tricks for better employee experiences only work if everybody buys in. You can't have different people doing disparate things. Otherwise, this is not going to work. It's hard for global companies working across different time zones, as well as companies that have hierarchical structures, to reward activity over achievement. The good news is that more leaders are embracing the idea of balance and encourage going off the grid at least during the weekend. And yeah, some companies are going to permanently shift to a remote working culture, but most are going to return to work in an office in person, at least for some period of time when it is deemed safe. Workplace loneliness has been an issue since COVID hit here, right? We're all working remotely, but you can also be lonely in an office as well. So now is the time for us to start rethinking and considering a number of in-office return to work cultural changes, right? Let's encourage in-person conversations over email. Small talk is fine. It's disappeared in the age of virtual meetings, but it's an important aspect of building in-person relationships. And let's rethink the way workspaces are designed for health and safety, but also in a way that encourages informal conversations. And that's key. As are the return to both social events that are formal and informal during and after working hours. We've all found ways to flex our empathy muscles this year, and we can't let that atrophy in the months and years ahead. Fostering environments of positivity and psychological safety will make employees feel more comfortable and more motivated. We long since stopped apologizing for those interruptions, right? When the dog barks or when the kids run in after coming home from school. These are our work from home adjustments. So continuing that freedom from and just freedom from your fear of judgment in person, feeling like we can be ourselves around each other in old ways and new ways, it's going to be huge. And we can solve these problems by just engaging each other and enabling a better employee experience. Something political. Last week I spent some time talking with a few of my neighbors who are weighing a run in the local school board elections later this year. Now, you may remember that I was part of a small group that helped organize a petition and a protest last summer that, very much guided by medical advice and science, pushed our school administration to reopen the schools on a full 5-day schedule. The elementary schools needed to be back in person, and now they are. Now, that experience showed many of us that the school district's Board of Education is a non-functioning, vestigial body that favors meetings over achievements. So as a result, these two concerned parents are contemplating putting their money where their mouths are and running for the open Board of Education seats. The saying that all politics is local is not entirely true. But within a small town where everyone knows each other, the blueprint for successful protest and campaigning is relatively simple. And what we did, we organized the petition that over 1,100 parents in our community signed. We held a rally on school grounds with hundreds of parents showing up. We had experts speaking and we invited the local press. We established simple, clear objectives and prioritized the ones that were the most important and the ones on which we were willing to compromise. It wasn't a revolution, but we achieved resolution. And the word revolution usually stirs up images of storming the barricades and armed struggle. And yes, I may have had the Les Miserables soundtrack in my head as we congregated around the administration building last summer. But the common blueprint for nonviolent protest or civil change, it's proven effective in changing the world at local levels. Now, the first step to any successful movement is picking a battle that you can win. Small, winnable battles. That's critical. Campaigns and movements are built to inspire action, but it's easier said than done. While public sentiment for change can be hard to gauge, candidates and activists really need to first make a name for themselves before they can then draw in the crowds. And to get people moving, they need a vision that followers can support. I look back at former San Francisco and the late San Francisco councilman Harvey Milk. He lost 2 elections in San Francisco before revising his strategy to campaign on something that everyone cared about: dog shit in city parks. That's how he got elected. Then, once he was in office, he was able to focus on bigger things. So whether national or local, or public or private, institutional regimes are held up by pillars of support. If you could knock down one or even apply pressure to one of those pillars, the whole thing could topple. One pillar is certainly financial, right? That's why the first thing a movement or a campaign needs to do is identify the sources of financial support for the leaders in power and neutralize them. Another pillar is sort of the social being. Human beings tend to follow groupthink. So aligning with key influencers and tastemakers in a community can sway large swaths of public sentiment. The objectives and the strategies are important, but delivery of the message can also make or break the success of any movement or campaign. Groups in power often rely on limited transparency, public ignorance, and even outright deception to maintain the status quo. Or in the case of dictatorial regimes, right, they force compliance on their subjects. Forcing transparency is a great tactic that the challenger can use against an incumbent. Doing so in a civil way, but there's almost always something that isn't being fully shared, and you can expose that. And tone matters, perhaps even more than the message itself. People want to be informed and educated, but they also want to be inspired. They want to be entertained. By cleverly tapping into emotion, activists and candidates can change the perception of an incumbent regime. When most people hear the word revolution, they are imagining an obsolete bloodbath. However, a wealth of historical knowledge and data shows that nonviolent revolutions are actually more effective in terms of producing positive change. Peaceful revolutions are more likely to create vibrant societies. They uniquely inspire action and draw in people. And after all, people are much more likely to join a group of joyful, ordinary people who are fighting for their rights. That's what inspires people. And as we saw earlier this year at the Capitol building, using violence to achieve change does not work. Ultimately, the keys to local movements and campaigns follow the brand and consumer marketing funnel that many of us live and breathe. Awareness, consideration, conversion. Candidates have to make a name for themselves. They have to have their platforms known, but doing so in a simple way, a few simple bullet points. They have to overcome inertia and compel an action, whether it's to protest or march or vote. Make that call to action very clear. Change movements can be quite simple, but have to be built on powerful visions in a way that ordinary people will get behind. Getting involved in local issues has been more rewarding than I realized it ever could have been. These are the most relevant issues that impact us on a daily basis. So if you want to change the world, you can and should start in your own neighborhood. So to my neighbors who are passionate and purposeful about bringing change in the local school board, I look forward to your proposals for a compelling path forward. I am excited to see how you work creatively, and I'm ready to help you. Get out there and make it happen. Something professional. And I make no secret about the fact that Twitter is, and probably always has been, my favorite digital platform for personal use. Right? The openness, the conversation, the unfiltered serendipity, the ease of use of the platform, the moment-driven social dialogue, it all comes together in this raw, exciting way, and it never sleeps. Sometime last year, Twitter added a feature allowing users to limit who can reply to yours and mine, our organic tweets. I hated it at the time. I hate it still. I've never used it. But now Twitter's expanding this feature for brands to use in their promoted posts and advertising. That's when it becomes professional. In short, brands can now limit who's able to reply to their ads. That's not how the social media platforms were intended to work, and that's not what consumers want. Limiting the ability for members of the community to interact, whether on an individual or promoted tweet basis, is taking Twitter down a slippery slope. Yeah, platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Snapchat and Twitter are as much media platforms as they are social communities. These companies are smart to offer features that make brands feel more comfortable about putting thousands, millions of dollars into amplifying their content. But deliberately limiting interactivity and engagement goes against what Twitter was founded on in the first place. There is one caveat. If a post or tweet sparks some sort of negative reaction or a dangerous thread after it's gone live, I can see turning off replies then. This could be good as a post-moderation compromise if the unintended consequences of a tweet cause brand or even personal harm or damage. But this shouldn't be the intent behind any public brand post. Building a tougher skin when trolls or critics attempt to derail the conversation, it's just good practice at this point in the path to digital maturity. Instead, I think brands should welcome comments and feedback and replies and the discussion that it engenders. It's not all going to be positive. We know this. But smart, prepared brand managers and community managers, digital teams, and agencies should have contingency plans in place for most scenarios. Escalation protocols and moderation processes. You put those in place, and that's the point. So let's agree to keep this feature in our back pockets, on the back burner, and protect the internet, and especially Twitter, as an open, fun, and occasionally weird platform. And finishing off with something personal. As of this recording, COVID vaccine deployment across the United States is somewhere around 15% of all eligible adults, which is great. While we can look back and learn from many of the mistakes made in first preparing for and then reacting to the spread of this virus, others are choosing to look ahead to a not so distant time in the future when we can reopen and return to many of the pre-pandemic activities we enjoyed and maybe even took for granted. And that's a good thing. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's beginning to open up and feel real. President Biden has said that by early summer, any adult who wants the vaccine should be able to get one. In the meantime, the rollout prioritization in terms of eligibility, elderly, at risk, pre-existing conditions and comorbidity issues, it's right. These have proven to be more catastrophic for those who contract COVID-19, so that's who we should start protecting first. The COVID pandemic has been an exercise in social collaboration and communal responsiveness and problem solving and togetherness beyond our wildest imagination. It's also been a test of our individual morality and our decency. Despite a scary small number of Americans who believe that the virus is a hoax or overblown and put others at risk by not following basic safety protocols, the large majority of the global population took this virus seriously and did what was necessary to keep themselves and their neighbors and all of us safe. Most people stayed home. They wore masks. But in our collective quarantine fatigue, right now we're starting to see a growing number of people who are letting down their moral fortitude, who are circumventing or ignoring the prioritization guidelines. Granted, I know it's different in each state, but if you're jumping the line to get a vaccine ahead of others who are at greater risk or in greater need, I have a problem with that. In the past 2 weeks, I've heard of too many stories of young, healthy people receiving their vaccines while others who maybe older or may not be as digitally savvy still aren't able to get through on the phone or online to schedule their appointments. Now is not the time to sacrifice morality and decency for selfish impatience. Personally, my wife, my parents, our in-laws, everyone's gotten their vaccines. I'm like the only one in my entire circle who hasn't. In New York State, I don't meet the age requirements for phase 1 vaccine deployment, and I only partially, questionably may meet one of the health, pre-existing conditions. It could be argued that I am eligible, but it's a dilemma. As the weather gets warmer and spring looms, my impatience is growing by the day as well. I get it. I've casually even found myself searching for and even found open slots. But I haven't made an appointment. So, do I wait? On the one hand, there are people who need it worse and more badly than I do. But by getting the vaccine and knocking myself out of the way very quickly, I could also just be safe and help protect others by not getting sick. So here's how I found my compromise. I've put myself on one of those throwaway end of day leftover vaccine wait lists, because there are people who are calling and making multiple appointments and then canceling at the last minute, and there's actually a surplus of vaccines in many locations at the end of the day. And because of the way that storage and expiration time limits work, many of them are actually getting thrown out at the end of the day. So I'm putting myself on that end of day overflow list because I don't think it should be wasted. I mean, I do believe that getting vaccinated is better than wasting a dose. But no matter when or how I get vaccinated, I hope you all do it as soon as you possibly and ethically and morally can. So I hope I can encourage you one last time to get in on the fun. The NCAA tournament tips off really Friday. That's our deadline, Friday at noon, to enter your picks. But it's a truly unconventional, unprecedented format this year. The schedules are very different. Even the days when things tip off are different. Teams are all going to be in a bubble in and around the Indianapolis area, which means that anything can happen and everyone has a chance in this year's March Madness pool. Now, for information, you can check out mattworst.com, where you can find more information about March Madness, and just generally have a great week.